All right. Moving on to green. We have Defiant Survivor. So this is a 3-mana 3/2 survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it is tapped, Manifest Dread. So there are some decent 2-mana vehicles in Standard already. I think for this to be good, you have to make sure that it is tapped on the turn that you play it. But if you curve this into like the Schooner can attack, give this a counter. Now it's 4/3, and then it's make it a 2/2. So I don't know if this is exactly going to see play in a format like Standard, but it's pretty powerful. It's a 3-drop that can potentially come with 2 bodies and keep getting more and more. So interesting for sure. Next up, Valgavoth's Onslaught, XX green, Manifest Dread X times, then put X +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So this is 3 mana, make a 3/3, 5 mana, make 2 4/4s, 7 mana, make 3 5/5s, right? So I don't know if this, I don't think this style of thing is actually good in Standard. Again, I say it all the time, Sunfall, Temporary Lockdown, stuff like that. But you can tutor this with Micromancer, which is kind of cool. I don't know if Micromancer is a card that will ever see play in Standard, but I've definitely tried it a bit myself. And this is an appealing sort of top end to be able to get. I hope that this card sees play, but I don't know if it's going to be great. This is the type of card you could put in your deck and definitely win games with, but I don't know if it's worth doing. I kind of doubt it. The top end of the things you can do in Standard is pretty strong. So next up, Under the Skin, 3 mana, sorcery, Manifest Dread. Return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this card's interesting. It's kind of like an Eternal Witness, but it has the upside of you can just have no graveyard, and you play it, and you mill a card, right? So you get to pick the card you want to add, and then put the other in the graveyard. So maybe you're adding a second copy of Under the Skin to your hand, or excuse me, you're manifesting a spell as a 2/2, and then you're milling a land, and you get the land back. So it can sort of function like a Borderland Ranger style thing, where you don't even necessarily need a graveyard for it to do something. Also, I think it should trigger Insidious Roots, like if you put a creature in your graveyard and then you add it back. So that's sort of a cute curve. It can also pick up other copies of Insidious Root because it's return a permanent. It scales well into the late game. It's kind of like an Eternal Witness, where eventually when your graveyard's loaded, you can just get back your best card. So this card seems pretty good to me. And it's nice to have a card like this that you can just play on curve. You don't have to wait till something ends up in the graveyard, because most of the time your deck is going to be about half permanents, or maybe more than that, depending on the style deck you're playing. Next up, Monstrous Emergence. I love this card. 2 mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, choose a creature you control or reveal a creature in your hand. Deals damage equal to the power of the creature you chose, or the card you revealed to target creature. So this is good green removal, which one of the problems I've had in Standard has been the fact that black has better creatures than green does, where it has like Archfiend of the Dross and Shieldred and Preacher of the Schism. And then it obviously has better removal than green does because it's black. I think it should have better removal. I don't think that it should necessarily have better creatures. So this sort of shifts the paradigm back in the direction of green. This is not better than Go for the Throat, but this is a green removal spell that you don't have to worry about getting 2-for-1 versus black removal. So if you play a Shieldred and I play this and reveal my big monster, even if you have Go for the Throat, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about having a bite or a fight spell and just getting 2-for-1. So I love this design. I think this card is pretty good. It specifically is going to end up being good in like blue-green and mono-green decks because you don't have very good removal, but I adore this design. This is one of my favorite designs in the set. I think it's sort of like in-your-face obvious, where like, how has this not been a thing? And it kind of has with like the revealed dragon stuff, but huge fan of this one. Very happy to see it. Next up, Hauntwood Shrieker, 3 mana, 3/3. When it attacks Manifest Dread, you can spend 2 mana, reveal target face down permanent. If it's a creature card, you can turn it face up. So the dream is you attack with this, and then you put a Valgavoth face down, and then you flip it face up, and your opponent's just like, okay, I lost the game. In practice, I don't know how much that's gonna happen. This just being a 3/3 means it dies to a lot of stuff, like Lightning Strike, and obviously Go for the Throat and whatnot. It also just gets blocked, like there's Preacher of the Schism, there's Sentinel of the Lost, whatever, the 3/4, there's Glissa. So I don't think that this card is going to end up being great. If you're on the play, this could definitely run away with the game, and you can get some random cheese stuff. But it's cool. If you want to try to play like a Vanifar Cloak Manifest deck, this probably goes in that. I think it's a sweet design. Maybe it'll be good when there's a Mana Elf in Standard. But yeah, 3/3 is a bit rough in my opinion. Next is Coordinated Clobbering. 1G sorcery. Tap 1 or 2 untapped creatures you control. They each deal damage equal to their power to target creature and opponent controls. So this is more green removal. And this can kind of play around to Go for the Throat the same way, where maybe I really want to kill your Preacher or whatever, and I tap both of my big creatures, and you can kill one, but it'll still deal with it. Tapping the creatures is pretty awkward though. Like, I want to attack you, right? But this works with survival, so I don't know if this is a constructed card, but it's cheap enough to be worth looking at. It can also trigger Valiant. Yeah, so cool card. Next up, Twitching Doll. 2 mana artifact creature, 2/2. Add 1 mana of any color, and then put a nest counter on it. And then tap, sacrifice it, create a 2/2 creature token with reach for each counter on Twitching Doll. Activate it as a sorcery. So this works with every counter. So nest counters don't really do anything, but they get you more spiders. But like maybe you're putting 1/1 counters on this, and then you can pop it off and get a bunch of 2/2s. Just like 2 mana, 2/2 mana guy in Standard is not very good. It's not particularly exciting to me, but this card has some differences compared to the other 2 mana 2/2s. First off, it's good at setting up Delirium. If you care about Delirium and you play a mana guy, most of the time your opponent just has to kill it because, you know, Moxen are good or whatever. Having extra mana is good. And then this will put an artifact and a creature in your graveyard. Also, it's an artifact, so if you have Teething Wormlet in your deck, I can trigger that, and it dodges Go for the Throat, which matters. A lot of people play with Go for the Throat. I've probably said that card's name a million times in these videos. It's a good card. So that matters. And it's nice to have a mana creature that sort of scales up, where this can become something later in the game. It's awkward that it takes so much time to make a lot of 2/2s, but there's Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which puts counters on things and then gives things their activated abilities. So that works really well, where you're getting the counters, and then you can, maybe you already have a creature that has counters on it. Maybe you have a creature with 2 counters, and then you Soul Cauldron, now it has 3, and then you sack it, and you get all your 2/2s, and then you can Soul Cauldron those 2/2s, and you can just sort of keep chaining it over and over again. So I think this card with Agatha's Soul Cauldron is really appealing, but you still run the risk of just getting hosed by Sunfall and Temporary Lockdown. So I'm not sure if it's going to be worth doing, but very, very interesting design. I think this is probably the best like 2 mana creature in Standard. Now we have Insidious Fungus, 1 mana 1/2. Pay 2 to sacrifice it, choose 1, destroy artifact or enchantment, and draw a card. You can put a land from your hand into the battlefield tapped. So Growth Spiral, kind of. This card is just cheap. It's kind of Haywire Might adjacent, and it can ramp you into 4. So yeah, not too much to say about it. It's just like a flexible thing. It's cheap. Cheap cards are good, obviously, for a lot of reasons. So worth keeping an eye out on. Also, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. you can use it to turn your creatures into clues, sort of. So, next up, Patchwork Beastie. 1 mana 3/3 Delirium. Can't attack or block unless you have Delirium. And at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. This card probably doesn't make the cut, but I've had constructed decks in the past where I just wanted a 1 mana thingy that could mill me. So this fits that. Also, it itself sets up Delirium. Like, milling these is appealing, sacrificing these is appealing. And 1 mana 3/3 is good if you do get it turned on, but I don't know. This card's a cool role player. Probably won't end up doing anything. Alright, next up, a card I've seen a lot of people very excited about, which is Kona Rescue Beastie. 4 mana 4/3. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Alright. I don't really know. So my inclination is that this card sucks. For a lot of obvious reasons that cards like this in the past have sucked, which is it's not good against removal, right? Like, if this thing triggered when it became tapped, that's one thing. But your opponent can just kill it, right? Like, there's a window in time where they can, in your combat or whatever, before the start of your main phase 2, they can remove it while it's tapped. So for that reason, I think that this card probably sucks. Also, things have to line up, right? Like, you have to have something that's worth putting into play. You have to put these cards that make it so this is tapped, because you kind of need it to do the thing on turn 4 to be worth doing. It just dies to Lightning Strike, it dies to Go for the Throat, all the same removal stuff. I don't know, maybe someone has some fancy list with this card where it's really good. 4 mana 4/3 is not good on rate at all, it's really bad. I don't see it. But yeah, it can put Atraxa into play. Like, for something like this to be good, I think it has to fit in this weird plan where you're playing a deck that doesn't have creatures in it, and then your opponent takes out the removal, and then maybe you can do this. But I don't buy it. Like, maybe you can just have, like, Skrelv in your deck and some vehicles, and you put Atraxa into play, or just whatever big, unbeatable Valgavoth Omniscience type thing. But I don't know. I don't see it. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but maybe I'm wrong. It's true with all of these cards. I just do not see this card being good. But for casual play and stuff like that, it's probably very, very exciting. Next up, Enduring Vitality. 3 mana 3/3 Vigilant. Enchantment creature. Creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. And when it dies, it returns as an enchantment. So this is 2 green pips for your Green Devotion. Probably not a card I would put in the Green Devotion deck, but it can go there. It's a hit off Collected Company. You can do stuff with this in Tyvar in Standard. I don't know what you do with this card. My inclination is that it's not great, but it's kind of exciting. Like, it's powerful, but I don't know. I guess in a Devotion deck, when it dies, it sticks around. It's kind of like Old Growth Troll in that sense. I think it's much worse than Old Growth Troll, but maybe if you have, like, Burning Tree Emissaries, or I don't know. If you're making a lot of tokens, this could be cool. I think there's better things you could be doing than this, but its stat line and everything it has going on, it's not terrible. I've seen worse cards. I don't know if this one will make the cut. Next up is Say Its Name. 2 mana sorcery, mill 3. Then you may return a creature or land card to your hand, exile this card, and 2 other cards named Say Its Name from your graveyard. Search your graveyard, hand, or library for Altonic, the Thrice Called. Put it on the battlefield. So, is this card good? No. Is this card terrible? Also no. It's very cool. I think that this is kind of an exciting thing to have in Magic. Like, probably don't do things like this super often because they're maybe scary. But just as a 2 mana sorcerer, this isn't that bad. It's like Grapple with the Past, which I think was an instant, but it was a card that saw play in Standard. Probably doesn't make the cut nowadays, but you do have this upside of being able to tutor up this 9/9. It doesn't find Insidious Roots, which kind of sucks. But if you wanted to play a budget deck or just like mess around with your friends, I think you could beat, like, I think you, on Arena Ladder or whatever, you could probably do this. Like, you could probably build a deck around this and Altanic, which we'll get to later, which is like a 9/9 trampler. But yeah, I think, what is the name? There's some card in Standard that just mills you a lot of cards. I think I rotated, never mind. Whatever. Besides the point. If you can mill yourself enough, or you just get lucky and you hit 3 of these, like, this can be kind of insane. Like, imagine if you turn 1 Stitcher Supplier, turn 2 Deadly Dispute, play another Stitcher Supplier. Potentially on turn 2, if you spike and mill 9 cards and hit 3 of these, you could have a 9/9. That's so unrealistic, but like I said, this card on its own is not terrible. Like, I have seen people put worse cards in their decks, so. Cool card. I will probably try it. I will probably fail, but I encourage you to do the same. Also, all of the cards are commons and uncommons, so that's nice. Next up, Overlord of the Hauntwoods. 5 mana, 6/5, impending 4, cast for 3 mana. ETB or attack, create a tapped colorless land with all land types. I think this card is incredible. I don't know if I want to say this is the best card in the set. This is probably the card I've put in most decks out of the set so far. First off, Green Devotion, right? So you have a 3 mana double green pipped thing that ramps you, which is obviously appealing. And the 5 mana part is also a 6/5, so it triggers Kiora. The 3 mana impending cast triggers up the Beanstalk. So one of the decks I built was like a Green Devotion deck without the Beanstalk, because you could just curve up the Beanstalk into this, and then that's already 3 Devotion, and you can have a bunch of mana and draw a bunch of cards. I even built a mono green Devotion deck that has the green Leyline and this card and Leyline Binding. So this card immediately turns your Leyline Binding into 1 mana. So does the multicolor Leyline from Murders of Carlin Manor. But yeah, this card is just, I think it's just so good. Maybe I'm overrating it. Like, 3 mana ramp is pretty bad, but 3 mana ramp doesn't get to be like this sort of fixed Primeval Titan where you just have this giant creature that is ramping you and can kill your opponent and blocks and sort of needs to be answered, and then it enables Delirium, or excuse me, it enables Domain, and it enables Delirium because it's an enchantment creature, and you can sack it to Enigmatic Incarnation. You could play up the Beanstalk on turn 2, you could play this on turn 3, get your land, draw a card off up the Beanstalk. Then on turn 4, you can play Leyline Binding for 1 mana, draw a card off of the Beanstalk, and then play Enigmatic Incarnation, and then you can either sack this to get a 6-drop, or you could sack your Leyline Binding to get a 7-drop. You could see how this card is powerful. I think it's pretty obvious when you think about some of the synergies. Yeah, these Overlords look incredible to me. This one is not the exception. I think this is maybe the best one, but the white one is I'm a little more excited about, but I think the fact that this is already in the same color as Up the Beanstalk is a big deal. Card seems great. Next up, Balustrade Worm. 5 mana, 5/5, trample haste, can't be countered. You can spend 4 mana and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter. So I don't know if this is the type of thing that matters in Standard. I want it to. If you are a Delirium deck and you are milling yourself a ton, this is very appealing just to get a free 4 mana 5/5 trample haste. Also, it has the upside of if you're playing against a control deck, you can just counter it, or you can just cast it and can't be countered. Just 5 mana 5/5, 4 mana 5/5. I don't think it's as exciting as maybe it would have been a few years ago. I hope this card is good. Probably is not the best. Next up, we have Tyvar the Pummeler. 3 mana 3/3, tap an untapped creature you control, and it gains indestructible. Tap it. And then you can spend 5 mana to give all your creatures +X/+X, where X is the greatest power. So, first off, survival creatures. It's good with that. This looks like a good Magic card. I don't know if it actually is. It's just kind of small, and a lot of things exile, and playing to the board is not a very good idea, and it doesn't, like, draw cards, and I want this card to be good. Like, this is the type of card that I think is the type of thing that's fun when it's good in Standard, but that's just not where we're at anymore. It just gets blocked by Preacher. It's not big enough. Like, eventually you can, you know, pump your board and one-shot your opponent, but you're just going to get temporary lockdown in Sunfall, and they can kill your other creatures and they just block. I don't know. I hope this card is good. Maybe I'll try it in Elves in Pioneer, just because it's sort of like an Azuri. It's like a mana sink, and Elves decks are really good at flooding the board and pumping themselves. But you even see a lot of temporary lockdowns in Sunfalls in Pioneer now. Those cards are just there's something. I've made my piece about those cards enough times. I don't need to do it in the Duskmourn spoiler video. But next card, Hedge Shredder, 4 mana, 5/5. Vehicle, when it attacks, mill 2. Whenever one or more lands are put in your graveyard from your library, put them on the battlefield tapped, crew 1. Okay, so first off, I guess what, Hedron Crab? You can Hedron Crab, mill yourself, get lands, mill yourself, get lands, mill yourself, get lands, mill yourself, get lands. Maybe put your deck into your graveyard, which is obviously appealing. You can get your Archamoebas and whatever else. I don't know if that's good enough for Modern. It's probably not. This card's 4 mana, but Standard, and maybe in like Pioneer Greasefang this matters. But for the most part, in Standard, things might be slow enough where you can just use this as a fair card to get a bunch of mana. I don't know. This card just looks scary and powerful. It's probably not going to be that big of a deal, but I think it's definitely worth putting on the list to discuss because of how powerful it can be. Also, it's kind of a decent rate, like vehicle that just does stuff, and 4 mana 5/5 crew 1. It can just attack and mill you and ramp you on its own. It doesn't need too much help. So sweet card. I'm not sure if it'll show up, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it shows up in a few places. All right, now we have Altanic, the Thrice Called. This pairs with the card earlier. 7 mana, 9/9 trample when it becomes targeted. Draw a card if it's your opponent's card, and then you can excuse me. You can spend 2 mana, discard it, and return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you have Fabled Passage, if you have fetch lands in your format, you can use this. Maybe you can like reanimate it in Modern. I don't know why you would do that. I guess Living End or something like that. But for the most part in Standard, I think if you do want to build a deck with this, you just jam 4 Fabled Passage in your deck, have some self-mill. And yeah, this is just like a thing. It can be reanimated. It's big. It's not useless when you just draw it on its own, right? Like you could just play a Fabled Passage and then on turn 2 discard it to ramp. And then there's the 4 mana reanimate in this set, so you could just put this into play on turn 3 without doing that much work. So turn 3 9/9 trample that draws a card when it gets targeted is pretty good. Not much else to be said about that. So interesting card. I don't know exactly where it goes or if it's worth playing or the type of thing that's worth doing, but I do think the 2 mana discard buyback or reanimate a land it potentially makes this actually something that you should consider in your reanimate style decks. I don't think the reanimator decks are going to want to be green. That's maybe the biggest problem with this card, but very cool design. Happy to see it uncommon for people that don't want to have to spend a bunch of money to play games of Magic. So very interesting and exciting design to me. Now we have Omnivorous Flytrap, 3 mana 2/4 Delirium. ETB or attack. I should just say enters, not ETB. When it enters or attacks, if there are 4 or more card types, distribute 2 1/1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. And then if there are 6, double the number of counters on those creatures. So, how easy is it going to be to have Delirium on turn 3? It's going to be really hard. Maybe you play like a Cash Grab and a Fabled Passage, and you're good to go. But if you do have Delirium with this card, it's like a 3 mana 4/6, and then once you get to 6, It's a 3-mana 4/6 with an attack trigger too. You can put the counters on other things. I don't know how good this card is. It's pretty hard for me to tell because in the past Delirium cards weren't that great, but also the set is full of enchantment creatures and artifact creatures. I would not be surprised if this card ends up being very strong. But my gut instinct is that it's just too hard to have the Delirium early in the game. So, in a format like Pioneer, maybe with like cycling cards and other ways to mill, this could be good, but you're still vulnerable to all the graveyard hate and rest in peace and whatever else. So, interesting card. I hope that this card sees play because I think it's very cool. All right, that's it for the non-rooms. Now we have, I think there's just one. Yep. The only green room on my list is Walk-in Closet and Forgotten Cellar. It's a 3-mana Crucible of Worlds, so you can play lands from a graveyard. And then a 5-mana Yawgmoth's Will, where you can cast spells from your graveyard, and if a card would be put in your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So, I don't have that much to say about this. It's just 2 cards that are appealing to players. Crucible Worlds doesn't really matter in constructed formats that aren't like casual. But maybe 5-mana Yawgmoth's Will matters. Also, if you're playing Lotus Field, the Crucible's kind of cute, where maybe your Lotus sacks lands and then you can play lands. I don't think that this card matters, but I should probably have it on the list because it's 2 sort of powerful Magic cards stapled together. I don't know what you can do with Forgotten Cellar. Like, obviously you can use it. It triggers up the Beanstalk. You can use Hidden Strings, pour over the pages. I'm not sure. I don't think you put this in the Lotus Field deck, but I'm not an expert. I'm sure there's plenty of people that have already talked about it that are Lotus Field players. But yeah, interesting card. So that is it for green. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.